You're listening to Parasearch Radio. News, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or their affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Haunted Histories with your host Penny G. Morgan, right here on Parasearch UK Radio.
Good evening, everybody. How are we all? I hope you're all well. Wow, I've already got 2 people in the chat room. Hi, Kerry. Hello, the creator. Thank you for the lovely words you said about me last night, Mr. Clements. There was a wee tear in my eye. And, Kerry, yes, I am a cheeky mare. You know this. But anyway, hi, everyone. How are we? Hope we're all well and raring to go for another Haunted History show. Oh, that rhymes, doesn't it? Oh dear, that sounded a bit wrong. Ready to go for another Haunted History show. Well, it is. It's Haunted Histories. What more can I say? Haven't really got much to tell you all. It's going a bit quiet now for a while. School holidays are fast approaching and all that kind of thing. But apart from that, still researching and working on the second book and all that kind of thing. So I'm sure there'll be more coming from me soon. But on that note, I'm not going to leave it too long because this is a cracker of an interview. And as you'll hear, it's not just me and one guest. I had to look after 2 of the little blighters. Okay, so on tonight's Haunted Histories, I'm joined by a very familiar voice to those of you who listen to Parasearch and predominantly listen to Haunted Histories. The wonderful Mr. Richard Estep is on the line with us all the way from Colorado. Hi, Richard.
Hey, Penny, how are you?
I'm all right. Did you notice how I pronounce your surname then?
You did. Good job.
I'm getting there, slowly but surely. But he's not on his own tonight. He's actually joined by one of his fellow investigators from Colorado who he's worked with for quite a long time, and that's Mr. Jason Fellon. Is that the correct way to pronounce it, Jason?
Yes, ma'am. Jason Fellon. How you doing, Penn?
Hi, Jason. The reason I say that is I have known Richard now for it's about 2 years, actually. And first time I spoke to him, I said, how do I pronounce your surname? Is it Estep or is it Estep? And he went, Estep's fine. He left it until about, was it 6 weeks ago you finally told me you preferred it? It's Estep, not Estep, Richard?
Yeah, I mean, Estep's how it's pronounced.
But 2 years. 2 years you took to tell me.
So many different ways. Yeah.
Hence the joke now about pronouncing his name. But the show tonight isn't about how to pronounce people's names or anything like that, because we could have hours of amusement with that one, especially as one of the names I'm going to be pronouncing, I'll probably pronounce wrong anyway. But we're actually talking about a place, it's actually in Colorado, isn't it? This place, Cripple Creek.
It is, up in the mountains.
How far is it from both of you then? How long does it take to get to?
A little bit over 2 hours.
Okay.
Approximately. Yeah.
So you're both in the Boulder area then, both of you?
Yes, ma'am.
So you're both in the Boulder area. Okay. So 2 hours, that must be like an investigation almost on your doorstep, isn't it?
Yeah. For this country, it's positively next door. Yeah, just a 2-hour drive is great.
Yeah. Sounds good. Well, seeing as, Richard, you fly sort of 8-9 hours to come and do an investigation.
Well, we just drove 15 hours to investigate when we did the John Wayne Gacy, the serial killer movie theater in Illinois. So, even flying 8 or 9 hours isn't bad compared to some of the drives we make.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of the UK. If I drove for 15 hours, I'd be in Spain.
Well, it's like if you're investigating in Texas, you can start out in the morning driving and you're still in Texas after dark. It's huge.
It is huge, isn't it? Yeah.
It's also a great big playground for us, so it means you never run out of places to investigate.
There is that. But even saying that in the UK, even though we're like, I think aren't we a third of the size of Texas or something, the UK, or something, even not smaller, I'm still finding places recently. It's great. It's great, this hobby of ours. But anyway, on to Cripple Creek. Now, Cripple Creek is part of, and correct me if I get any of this wrong, Teller County.
That's right.
Teller County is one of the 64 counties that makes up Colorado.
Yes, ma'am.
Yep. Now, as I've said before to people, if you think of America's counties aren't like our counties in the UK. Our counties in the UK are more akin to an American state. The counties in the UK are actually known as hundreds, believe it or not, and that all dates back to the Doomsday Book and everything else, 1,000 odd years ago. But yeah, so Teller County is one of the 64, as it stands now, counties of Colorado. Now, it was actually, it's one of the things I find when I look at the history of the US is it's how amazingly recent it is. And that's normally a good thing, because it normally means when I start researching stuff, I can find things like newspaper accounts and all of that kind of thing. Whereas when I'm doing UK stuff that's like 1342, I'm kind of relying an awful lot on prior reports, and hoping that they haven't been, as I call it, Chinese whispered to where they are now. But Cripple Creek was basically, for want of a better, it was a gold mining town.
Yes, it supposedly is the world's biggest gold mining town, gold claiming town.
Right.
It's a big, like the biggest lode of gold that was found in that location. Actually.
And that was the Independence lode that was discovered by Winfield Stratton. Would that be that one?
Sounds right. Yes, ma'am.
Yep. And that was mined. Sorry, Jason. That was mined from, I think it was, according to the dates I found, 1893 to 1899, and produced just shy of 6,500 kilograms of gold from that
sounds about right.
load. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. Now, the town itself of Cripple Creek, I love that name. I think it's brilliant. Cripple Creek. It suffered two.
Be a great name for a whiskey, wouldn't it?
It would. Actually, yes, it would. You should put that to them, Richard. You might get to do the taste testing.
Right on. Well, supposedly a cow was trying to jump a small creek in the area and broke his leg and had to be put down, and that's how they got the name Cripple Creek.
You're joking.
No, And there's a famous song from the band. Actually, the band. It's called "Up on Cripple Creek." It's loosely based on that the area of Cripple Creek, Colorado.
Wow! I just thought it was a cool name. I wondered if it had some kind of Native American like history to it or something, and that it was translated as Cripple Creek. But naming it after a lame cow is a interesting.
Even funnier.
Interesting one. But the town itself suffered two massive fires in 1896. One hit one half of the town on the 25th of April, and the other one hit the second half of the town 4 days later. I don't know what you do for a living, Jason, but I know that Richard used to be a firefighter, an actual firefighter. Sounds like they didn't put the fire out properly on the 25th, Richard.
No, it sure does, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? Some of those embers were still burning. But they managed to rebuild the town pretty much in the same year. But they also realised a few years later, which I've done a few shows on these kind of mining towns on sort of the west side of the US, and they all seem to follow the same pattern. They realised that with mining and ore and money and all those kind of things comes a bit of naughtiness, that you need a kind of a judicial system to deal with, and courthouses and prisons tend to be built. And Cripple Creek was no difference, and I believe the jail went operational around 1900, 1901?
1901, I think, yeah.
Yeah. Now, it wasn't, and there are reasons I'm saying this, it wasn't sort of like your sort of Eastern State Penitentiary or Alcatraz or one of those. Because it was a county jail, it was really for what we would have called in the UK a house of corrections predominantly, so for the lower end of crimes, so things like prostitution, cheating at cards, being drunk and disorderly. But it was also used to house slightly more nefarious criminals whilst they were awaiting trial or being moved on to one of the bigger prisons at Buena Vista or Cannon City.
Mm-hmm.
Now, The other thing I found very, very interesting, and I'm going to ask you, we're going to get onto the investigation that you guys did there, but it had a floor that was just for women and juveniles.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay.
Second floor.
The second floor, okay. And it also had an area where the children of women who were incarcerated were looked after, almost like a nursery, for want of a... It's quite a forward-thinking place, in a way, in that respect.
Well, sometimes your kids went to jail with you if you were a mother. I wandered around the adult cell block looking at the graffiti, and there's a ton of graffiti going back a century, and one of the heartbreaking things in the men's cell block, somebody had scratched into the wall, they took my baby away from me. So not everybody was that fortunate. But sometimes if you had a female that was incarcerated and there was no one to look after the kid, what were you going to do? Leave it on the streets?
It's been known, even modern day it's been known. Social services pick up the tab and that kid literally has no one. But I just found it quite an interesting sort of observation when I was doing the research. But I know with you, Richard, you wrote a bit about this prison in your book, Trail of Terror.
Yeah, that's right. I was fortunate enough to go up there. I was invited to go to a charity investigation a few years ago, and so I went up with a fellow investigator, Catlin, and we joined a bunch of colleagues from different groups all coming together in a good cause. Mm-hmm. And I didn't expect a lot from it, to tell you the truth. I had pretty low expectations, but we had some strange things go on that night. And a great example of that was that we would hear the sound of voices when we were upstairs on the top floor of the male cell block. Mm-hmm. And it was like if you're ever in a room where somebody's talking elsewhere in the house, and you're not sure where it is, you go looking for it. We would hear this constant, just kind of hubbub of voices speaking and conversation. It seemed to be all around us. Whenever we would go check, you couldn't pin it down. It was the strangest.
Hello.
Yeah, can you hear?
Sorry. Yeah, I can hear you now. Yep.
Yeah, so that was kind of odd. But by far the weirdest thing that happened to us was that somebody saw my doppelganger, which was unexpected, to say the least.
Yeah. I was going to actually ask you about that, the doppelganger sort of. Was that when you were you actually in the prison at that point, or is it after you'd visited?
No, we were in the prison, and it turns out I'm not the only one either. I guess it's renowned for that kind of phenomenon. But the story was that I was in one of the cells, and one of my colleagues was on the door. Mm-hmm. We were just sitting in there doing an EVP session very quietly. This was on the men's upper floor. We were, just kind of fairly relaxed doing an EVP session, and one of my fellow investigators suddenly appeared in the doorway, and he saw me and just went white. The old saying, you look like you saw a ghost. Mm-hmm. And how did you get back in here so fast? So, well, I've been in here for half an hour. What do you mean? And he blanched and said, I just saw you at the end of the cell block. You were taking photographs, and I know you. I know what you look like. That was you. Don't tell me that it wasn't you. Well, I had somebody posted on the door. There was no way I could physically have gotten in and out of the cell at that time. So he had a bit of a sit down after that.
I'll bet. Well, the thing is, it's interesting, the whole doppelganger in prison thing, because I know you and I, when we investigated Bodmin earlier this year, that was a conversation that we had, because I said, it always seems to be prisons and asylums where you get this whole doppelganger thing. And you actually said to me at the time, I had that happen to me at Cripple Creek, and ironically, we had it happen at Bodmin, didn't we? Or what we think might have been something that we can't explain like that.
Yeah, did you tell that story on the Bodmin show? I don't recall.
No, I didn't.
You should totally go ahead and tell it.
What, to do with MJ?
Mm-hmm.
The MJ story.
Yeah.
To be honest, you recounted it to me because I wasn't there at the time. Can you remember it?
So it's in my notes. The specifics are in my notes, and I would have to pull it up.
Oh, okay. I think from what I can the thing I can remember, wasn't it on night 2, because we did 2 nights at Bodmin, and MJ Dixon of Sage, the Sage events and Sage Paranormal was there with us, and I might correct me if I'm wrong, Richard, but my memory of it is that she had quite a scary experience on the first night, which unnerved her quite a bit.
fair to say she jumped and screamed. Yeah, I'm sure MJ won't mind me saying that.
But what it meant was whenever she went for a cigarette break or to the toilets, and you did have to sort of almost go through the prison to get to, say, I don't smoke, but I use a toilet. You had to kind of go through the prison to get to either the doorway that they got out to go into the smoking area outside, or to go to where the toilets were. And she wouldn't go on her own. She'd always ask someone, after that experience she had on the first night, she wouldn't ever go into that area on her own. But then we saw her in that area, or you saw her, or I can't remember who it was who saw her now, but we saw her in that area on her own, walk past us and didn't acknowledge us, or something along those lines, wasn't it? And
that was one of the groups of investigators. It wasn't me personally, but it was recounted to me.
Yeah.
And they were like, why is she blanking us? Why is she not reacting to us? And of course, you just think maybe someone's in an antisocial mood. This shows how stupid we can be, and I include me in the forefront of this, because how many times have you heard this story that somebody sees what appears to be an apparition, and we're in the middle of arguably the country's most haunted jail, and nobody thought, that's odd, I'll just reach out and make sure it's actually her.
Yeah.
And it's generally because they look so real, you never for a moment question that could this be the real person or not? You just take it as read that it is. Yeah. They cast shadows, they make noise for the most part.
Yep.
And it's only afterwards you slap yourself and think, what was I thinking?
Yeah. I know.
Why didn't I take a picture of something like that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I know that our good friend Bill Taboni of the Australian Paranormal Society had an experience with that at Arradale, the lunatic asylum, where I think that wasn't a visual doppelganger, though. It was his voice or something. One of his colleagues said he heard Bill shouting at him to come into the, and it was Bill. And Bill's voice is quite distinguished. It's Bill. He's got a lovely. I love Bill's voice, but you can tell it's Bill. And he said he heard him shouting for him to come in, and Bill was like, "How could I? I was on the other side. I wasn't there." And it these sort of things are quite interesting. And I know the whole reason you told me this when we were at Bodmin was because I can't remember who I was standing with. I think it could have been Gaynor. And you all kept walking past us and you weren't acknowledging us, and we jokingly said, "Are you a doppelganger or something?" And that's when you started telling us this story, because you were doing that thing where you were fixate. You weren't. It was almost like you were in your own little world walking about, and we jokingly said, "Are you a doppelganger or something?" And you were like, "Why did you say that?" And that's when you started telling us this account. So it does make me wonder if it's something that is synonymous with certain kind of places, because you don't tend to hear it with stately homes or schools.
You mentioned hospitals. I'm sure Jason can tell you the story, but I was heard at Waverly Hills.
At Waverly Hills, yeah.
Go on, tell us the story, Jason.
Well, about 4 years ago, we went as a group to Waverly Hills, and long story short, Richard was up on the 5th floor, the children's area where the playground and stuff is, on the roof, basically. Mm-hmm. And somebody little bit later on, maybe 15, 20 minutes ago, could have sworn that they heard him down at the end of the body chute talking.
Right.
And that's 5 floors. That's probably a good 150 feet at least of difference where he was compared to where somebody heard him and could have sworn and has sworn that he was there.
And there's no sort of lifts or tunnel or sort of pipe work that his voice could have projected down into the...
Well, we don't think so. I mean, you're familiar with Waverly Hills. I mean, it's popular.
I've never been there, but I know it, yes.
Right. You know of the body chute?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Well, it's, how long is that, Rich? Maybe 1,000 feet down, straight down?
Yeah, and it's very well insulated is the other thing.
Yeah, it's concrete.
Yeah.
And supposedly he was down at the very end of it where the exit door was and the train tracks start. Mm-hmm. So that's a lot of distance between one area to the other to hear him talking. Even if he yelled, I highly doubt anybody could have heard him, even on the 2nd floor, the 5th floor.
Oh, wow.
It was very interesting.
Yeah. But it does seem to be something that is synonymous with hospitals of some sort or prisons. It seems to be the most common account of some kind of doppelganger experience, or that kind of, I want to call it playfulness to be nice, but that kind of thing happening. And that, as you're saying, it's happened at Cripple Creek.
And the odd thing about it is, well, the whole thing's odd, but one of the odd things about it is that Sean, when he kind of collected his thoughts, he said it was you, except there was one thing that was off. He said your shirt was a different color. And so it was like there was just one detail that didn't quite fit. Now,
well, we know it couldn't have been you then, Richard, because your uniform does not change.
Well, my uniform is always the same kind of trousers and shoes. It's basically scruffy PE teacher circa 1990s. But
some kind of Star Wars.
I was talking to Dave Schrader about it a while back on Darkness Radio, I think it was back then, when we talked about doppelgangers for some reason. And he said, have you considered the possibility that this isn't a doppelganger at all, that this is a time slip, that at some point in the future you'll visit the jail again and you'll be wearing like a different shirt? And that's kind of a glimpse into the future that Sean got. And I found that pretty intriguing.
That is quite intriguing, because we know that MJ is going to be doing some filming at Bodmin, I think next weekend actually. So she's going to be walking around there.
Yeah, we're quick to assume. I think there's an old saying in medicine, if you have a problem, a pain or an ache, you go to a surgeon, they'll recommend surgery. You go to a chiropractor, they'll recommend an adjustment, And so I think as paranormal investigators that primarily deal with haunted places, we're quick to label the phenomena as a haunting, as an aspect of a haunting, when it may be something entirely different.
Yeah.
Time slips are fairly well documented, aren't they, in the history of the literature of the paranormal. So maybe it's not that.
Yeah, that's an interest. But why only in these specific types of places?
Well, I think that's probably just a bias, I suspect. Like, we've heard of it most from those kind of places, but who's to say it doesn't happen anywhere?
To me, it makes more sense than the spirit is that powerful that it can create a double of you that can fool everyone. To me, that's always been something I thought, there's got to... The amount of energy that it would take to do that.
Yeah. Especially a place that has very limited electricity. Waverly Bodmin, maybe.
Well, but then you flip it around and you think, number one, there was one witness. And Murphy's Law, the spot where he saw it, was just out of range of our camera's field of vision. So I was super excited that we might have captured it on camera. And of course we didn't, because it was just out of arc. But we still don't know how and why people see ghosts. So it may have been a telepathic image in his mind. It may have been, may not have had any kind of objective reality at all.
It's funny you say the telepathy thing. That was exactly I was having a conversation about this with some friends of mine the other day who were like they're not investigators, and they were like saying they watch all like the Ghost Adventures and the Most Haunted and all that kind of program, and they're saying why are they so overly dramatic? Why are they so sort of about everything? Like, whereas you're quite laid back and you just talk about it like it's you're just reading out an account. And I said, you'll find most of us are like that. We're not we don't over-dramatise. It's not, well, I don't. I try not to. But we were actually talking about it, and they were saying, what was one of the theories? And I said, one of the theories is, because they said, why do some people see spirits and other people don't? And I said, one of the theories is it's a kind of telepathy. It's a kind of, we don't know, there's so much about the brain that we don't know. How do we not know? We're not just picking something up because we've got that ability in our brain to receive some kind of to receive some kind of communication, and it's actually not paranormal at all. It's perfectly natural, but we just don't know that yet. So it's interesting having these kind of conversations. But the time slip idea for doppelgangers, that makes sense. But the question is, the shirt you would have been wearing, Rich. Sorry, Jason. The shirt you would have been wearing. Did he tell you what colour shirt it was?
He did, and a large part of me wants to put one on and go exactly in that same spot. And
but would you wear that colour? Is it a colour you would wear? It is.
Yeah, I mean, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't particularly distinctive. I've always thought, though, that when we use the term seeing ghosts, I don't know that we see them at all. And this goes back to the telepathy thing, doesn't it? I think we perceive them, and our brain kind of creates that image in front of our eyes. I always encourage anyone, any client, or any fellow colleague that thinks they might be seeing an apparition, if you're quick-witted and you know what you're looking at, or you suspect you're looking at a ghost, if you take a fingertip and you use it to just depress your eyeball a couple of times so that what you're looking at blurs, it's a good way to tell if what you're seeing has any objective reality, because a hallucination or an extrasensory image should not blur when you push on your eyeball and distort the image.
Okay, it's interesting. What were you going to say?
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does actually. Yeah. What were you going to say? Sorry, Jason. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was interrupting you. I apologize. I was thinking maybe parallel universe also. Maybe there's a parallel universe out there, and you're just at the same time, the same location in that other universe where the world's sort of thin out, and the line between them thins out, and you can cross a little bit. That's why you might see something like that.
Possibly. That could explain deja vu as well.
Holds those universes, I mean, many of them are just almost identical to ours with just one or two minor differences.
Right. Yep.
But that could explain deja vu as well.
Yeah, it absolutely could, and a number of other phenomena. So maybe it's a universe that's identical in all ways but one or two. I just chose to put a different shirt on that night,
Yeah.
Maybe it's all very interesting. But you discovered, so we'll fast forward a little bit. Your most recent visit to Cripple Creek was earlier this year, wasn't it, guys?
No, it was last year.
Was it last year now? Blimey, isn't time fly?
Time's flying.
And the two of you are out there, but you were also joined by some Canadian friends of ours.
Yeah, the gentleman from Cops. No, I'm sorry. Go, Richard.
Go ahead, man.
And either of you, I don't mind which. So, Jason, you were joined by the boys from Cops.
All right. So we went out with our friend Wes Coleman, who is an investigator with a team called COPS, COPS, the Canadian Old Pervert Society, as I like to refer to it. But actually,
you do realise he's going to listen back to this, because Wes was actually going to be a guest as well. I was going to actually have to deal with three of these lot. But he's away, unfortunately, so he couldn't make it. But I'm pretty sure he'll listen back to it. So
you will. I'm pretty sure I'll get abused for it.
Yeah, it'll probably be me that gets the abuse for allowing you to say that, Richard. That's normally how it works.
Yeah. So COPS is the Correctional Officers Paranormal Society. It's a bunch of great prison officers, correctional officers from Canada, who also happen to be paranormal investigators, and we loved working with them. Wes and I had been introduced through our friends at the Jamaica Inn, through Corrine and Colin, and she'd said, you guys have the same style, the same approach, the same god-awful sense of humor, you should work together. And what better case to bring in prison officers than a place like the Cripple Creek Jail? And what's kind of cool is that these are the nicest guys you could wish to meet. They're consummate professionals, but they can flip that switch that prison officers have. So Jason and I would be in the cells at the end of the night, and they would lock down the jail just as they would lock down an actual jail. And they turn on that voice that prison officers have, and
very
so they
surreal.
go from being, they go from being the nicest guys in the world to having you crapping yourself just by raising the voice in a certain way. And I think it acted as a great stimulus for some of the paranormal activity in the jail.
I can imagine. Well, Wes did it at Bodmin with us, didn't he? He went into prison officer mode for us a few times, and I must admit, I mean, Wes, he'll hate me for saying this because he tells me I'm not allowed to tell people, but he's one of the nicest guys you can ever meet. He's very
no doubt.
He's very gentle. He's very protective. He's a big old softie, but he doesn't like me saying that. So apologies.
He's also a hell of a karaoke singer. We just learned.
Well, yes, I heard that, Mr. Elvis Presley himself. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
he was so good, I didn't want him to have any hamburgers, just in case we found him dead on the toilet the next morning. But yeah, multi-talented, but also a big shout-out to the rest of his crew. These guys were amazing, and they turned it into a busman's holiday. They came out, they visited the Stanley. I gave them a bit of a tour around the hotel. They drove up to Cripple Creek and got to see the sights. We went down a gold mine, talked a little bit about Tommyknockers and some of the stuff that miners might experience.
Well, I was going to come on to the miners thing in a second. So, yeah.
But these guys were a real asset, and I would work with them again anytime.
They are cracking. I mean, I am really hoping to get out to Canada at some point to do some investigating with them. Because I know I did a show not so long ago on Picton Heights, which is one of the locations they look after near Toronto, and I'm really hoping to get out there. I mean, I've got an open invite to get out there if I ever get out there, so I would love the chance to work with them, because I did enjoy the time I got to work with Wes at Bodmin. He's fascinating, so definitely great guys to work with. But you mentioned the mining link, and you mentioned the Tommyknockers. Now, I'm not going to talk so much about Tommyknockers because that's a whole show in its own right. But I know you said there was a bit of sort of a family kind of thing with the whole mining aspect, Rich.
Yeah, my grandfather was a miner during the Second World War, I know you, Penny, but maybe most of your readers will be familiar with the concept of Bevan boys.
I'd actually written that down. I never knew that about you, actually, but I'd written down Bevan boy, ?
Yeah, so you want to just talk about what that is before I go on?
In a nutshell, without boring everyone to tears, basically during World War II they realised that a lot of the guys who were, and they had a similar problem actually in World War One, but they didn't have Bevan boys in World War One. Actually, in World War One, a lot of miners were used as tunnellers, who would tunnel under the trenches to try and blow up the opposition trenches because they knew how to sort of create tunnels safely because they were used to mining, but that's by the by. So
hang on. We might be at cross purposes here then, because my grandfather, the term Bevan boy, as I understand it, when you were drafted, every 10th man was drafted into the mines.
Yeah,
correct?
That's World War II, yeah.
Yeah.
But I was saying the miners were also actually used in World War One, but not for mining coal. They were actually, it's one of the facts that I actually learned from reading the book Birdsong, and even though, this is when I say to people, if you read good historical fiction, you can still learn stuff as long as you go away and look it up afterwards.
Sure.
But I didn't realise that in World War One, I know we're sort of digressing slightly, but I think it's interesting and it shows how amazing these miners through the centuries have been. But you see those big craters near the trenches and the Western Front in France, and I always thought that was a bomb that got dropped from on top down, created the crater. No, it was a bomb that went off underneath, because what they were trying to do is they realised, well, we can't go over no man's land. Why don't we go under no man's land? So they actually drafted loads of miners into, it would have been part of the Royal Engineers, to actually tunnel under to try and get to the German trenches. But the Germans were doing exactly the same thing coming the other way. And so they would actually have to use stethoscopes to listen against the walls of these tunnels to try and hear where the opposition was underground. And then they would set charges to try and blow up the opposition trenches, and that's what a lot of those big craters are. They're the tunnellers, the miners, instead of having to fight. I don't know how many of them were actually buried alive, quite a lot. When they collapsed, or if a bomb did go off. But that was World War One. But in World War Two, they realised there was a shortage of coal, and so they did. I can't remember Bevan's first name.
Wasn't it Lord?
Pardon?
Wasn't it Lord?
It's a strange first name. Anyway, Bevan. He sort of said, well, why don't we, instead of sending them all off to fight abroad, and I'm paraphrasing here, sending them all off to fight abroad, why don't we restrict some of them to say they've got to stay in the UK and work the mines, because we still need coal. We can't function without coal. We need them bringing it up. And it was one of the jobs they didn't want women to do. So, yeah, these Bevan boys, and from what I remember, I've learnt about them, read about them, is a lot of them, they weren't that happy that they were staying at home.
No, it was miserable, and you know, I didn't appreciate this enough about my grandfather. It's something that I regret to this day, because he's a very humble man. But he had, the thing I always remember about my grandfather is, if you ever met him, he looked as though somebody tattooed his face. You know how you see Maori and people like that with those kind of facial tattoos. He had that all around one of his eyes, and I always thought that was a strange thing. And my mum told me actually afterwards, after he died, that he was in an explosion had gone off. It was either not calculated well or had bad side effects. He was actually kind of buried under the rubble for a while till his friends got him out. And coal dust had gotten blasted and imprinted in his face.
Wow.
And you're right. You know, you can only imagine that it was the era of, England expects every man and woman to do their duty. And, you know, almost everybody wanted to go fight. And they were told, nope, sorry, every 1 in 10. You're going to go down the mines. And, of course, it was no less essential and extremely dangerous. And I won't say there was a stigma to it, but there was definitely a sense of, I'm staying home while everybody else is putting on a uniform instead of welly.
Yeah. There was very much a sense of, I'm not doing my duty. I know it was exactly the same with World War One. I had relatives who were reserved occupations in World War One, working in the steel mills. And they would get the whole white feather treatment and things like that from people who said they were cowards because they weren't going away, but they'd been told they had to stay back and work in the steel mills because you still needed steel. And a lot of these kind of jobs, as much as they were letting women do stuff that other women hadn't been allowed to do previously, there were certain roles there was no way on earth they were going to let women do, and they still needed to be done. So they had to keep some of the manpower, and I'm not being sexist by saying manpower, some of the manpower back.
No, it's a very simple equation. No coal meant no Royal Navy. No Royal Navy meant no Atlantic convoys. And that meant that we starved.
Yeah. Well, no coal meant no steel. No steel meant no new ships, some aircraft, no armaments, no... no, it was all kind
ammunition.
of... Yeah, armaments, ammunition, yeah, all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't... And as you say, coal was what powered everything. And although people's homes were restricted on how much coal they could use, you still needed it, as you say, for the ships. You needed it for the places that were manufacturing stuff, sometimes to drive the machines that were making the stuff. That, it was kind of essential. But it must be quite moving to go down a mine shaft and realise what your granddad was facing every day.
Well, it's one thing to read about it or to hear about it and say, that's incredible, but I don't think you can truly appreciate it until you experience those similar conditions. And bear in mind, I experienced this for all of an hour and a half. These guys work 12-hour shifts, I believe it was,
if not more.
If not more, with overtime and things of that nature, and back-breaking conditions as well. So it just, for the first time, it gave me a real appreciation for what he'd undergone and had contributed during the war effort.
Amazing.
It was wonderful just for that.
Yeah. I think that's the reason I say, and the rest, I think it was something like 12 hours actually at the coalface, the technical term, but some of them, the shafts were so deep, it could take them nearly an hour just to get down to the coalface, which is why with some of the coal mines in the UK, I believe, when I can't remember why I looked this up once, but I did, that's why if there was an explosion, they couldn't get them out because they were an hour away, even by going down. It was before they started building the emergency shaft, the rescue shafts and stuff, which was relatively recently in historical terms. So it was a very dangerous job. Any kind of mining, very dangerous job. And
it is,
I don't think we respect people enough for doing.
Well, I totally agree. And one thing that links it to the jail is that they had a famous inmate at the jail, Jack Dempsey. Yeah. Sure you've heard of Jack. He was the boxing champion.
Right. I haven't actually got him as one of the names, actually, so go on.
Yeah. Well, Jack Dempsey had actually worked in that mine for a few weeks and had ended up leaving. Whether he was fired or what, we don't know, but he left because he wasn't up to the work, or so it was said. So this is a guy that's very tough with his fists, but the brutal conditions of the coal mine were a little too much for him, it seems.
Right. Wow. Okay, so...
Sorry, not the coal mine. It wasn't a coal mine.
Gold mine. Gold mine, yeah.
Still, mining is always tough.
Mining is any type of mining. Anything that goes underground is not something I'd want to do, being claustrophobic. The only reason I would probably make a good miner is I'm short, so I wouldn't be bending as much as some of them have to. But talking about mines, I did actually go to the National Cobalt Mining Museum that's in, I'll say it's near Wakefield, somewhere like that in the UK. And there's a mocked-up mine shaft that you can go into that would have been sort of 1800s, what it would have been like. Now, I'm only 5'2". Even my back was killing me going through it. So anyone taller than me would have literally been bent. I mean, I don't know how tall you are, Jason. I know, Richard, you're, 6'1", 6'2". You would have...
Yeah.
What was that,
no,
sorry?
I'm about 5'5", actually. I'm pretty short, too.
Oh, okay. So, okay, but I know with Richard, he would have had to have literally, without sounding kinky, been on all fours. You probably wouldn't have been able to walk.
Well, thanks for that image.
I don't know if I'll be able to get that out of my head now for tonight, unfortunately.
Well, it's all right. Last week, Gemma and I ended up talking about the fact she handcuffed another investigator to a bed at the Ancient Ramin to see if the sex demon... the sex demon. So this week we're talking about you on all fours. Now, God knows what I'm going to have next week. But anyway, Deary, deary, I'll have to put risque a warning on my shows now. But yeah, it's hard physical work, and like I said, the mine shafts weren't, whether it was gold, silver, tin, coal, they weren't built for tall people to be able to stand up in, because it was, they were built that you got out what you needed and made it safe. So, and of
course, your miners, you live in those conditions. You work hard, you party hard. So this is where the whole aspect of the soiled doves at Cripple Creek comes in.
Soiled doves?
Yeah, it's the polite term for the ladies of negotiable affection, the prostitutes.
Okay, yeah, all right. I've never heard of it called that before. Soiled doves. Ladies of the night, all that kind of stuff, but never soiled doves.
The term, and a big shout out to Michelle Roselle and to Ralph Copley at the jail, who were a wealth of historical information, as well as being nice enough to give us access. But they told us that if they've gone through the records, and the word prostitution was not on any of the arrest dockets, they had all these euphemisms for it, like ladies of the night and soiled doves, But it was regarded as an essential service, and these poor ladies were made to live in their own section away from the main part of town, and were allowed to come into town just one morning of the week to buy supplies and essentials. And the so-called respectable ladies would stay in and lock their doors and not go out when the soiled doves would come into town. The hypocrisy of it is just staggering.
But as you say, they were seen to be an essential service because it's what kept a lot of these... Well, the miners would have been men. A lot of them would have turned up to mine the gold mines without their families because they turned up to try and make the money. They would have lived in multiple occupancy boarding houses, all that kind of thing. And the sex trade would have kept them happy.
Boarding houses and bawdy houses.
Exactly.
So, but the women's block, though, had more than its fair share of female inmates that were in there for violent crimes themselves. They were no pushover, these ladies. They were tough, both on one another and sometimes on some of the men that they set out to bilk.
Good for them, is what I say. Don't let yourself be pushed around.
So true.
You may not think that if you were one of the punters, but, if you're going to mess her around and not give her her money, hey, you get what you're given. I know one of them, her name was Blanche Burton, and apparently she was in and out, if you pardon the pun, like a jack in the box.
Well done.
The jokes write themselves, don't they, Penny?
Oh, they do. It's like it's even like I've thought about saying some of this stuff. Anyway, so she was one of the famous ones. But when you went to Cripple Creek, I understand, Richard, and correct me if I'm wrong here, because you spent 3 days there. You did you guys did a 72-hour. Not quite a lockdown, because I think you said you came out so that you didn't all reek the place out.
Yeah, it was a lockdown in that we had prison guards locking us down, but we weren't in there 100% of the time. Yeah. We did leave and go shower. We stayed at the very haunted and super cool Imperial Hotel.
Is that in Cripple Creek as well?
It is. It's one of our favourite places to stay in that town. It's got its own haunted history, and it just feels like it, Oh,
so you two like to have a romantic weekend there, do you?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Almost, seems like once a month we go for a romantic evening somewhere.
But okay, so and I respect the hygiene. Okay, I respect the hygiene. But so, did you both get locked down in cells, or was it just one of you, or
both of us?
We both do that. We'd have the lights down. We would have Wes and his colleagues shut the place down using their harshest voices. You will behave, inmates, that kind of thing. And it definitely stirred some stuff up. And even knowing that you could get out, intellectually, of course, you know that you're not actually imprisoned. You think of all the people that were. And there's some heartbreaking stuff in that jail. One guy, I'll never forget this, had scratched, it's either combination drawn and scratched, a living room and the interior of a house on his cell walls. So he put in a window with a view out to the clouds and mountains. Oh. He'd drawn a fireplace, a cooker, all that kind of stuff. It looked as if it was an attempt to convince himself that he was actually not in prison, that he was at home.
Wow. So was this in the male block that you guys got locked down in?
Yes.
Yeah, the female block has a reputation for something violent, interacting with anybody that's involved with law enforcement. So they've had people that are connected with jails and and police forces and so forth slammed and shoved around up there. So, of course, Wes and his boys took this as a challenge. That was the first thing they made a beeline for. And they didn't get anything up there. We found the female part to be rather quiet.
Okay.
Most of our stuff came on the main cell block.
But have you ever tried going up there with a female member of law enforcement?
No, didn't have one of those with us at the time, unfortunately.
Right, okay. But so you got locked down in the male block, both of you. Jason, what sort of things happened to you?
Well, I would talk back actually after a couple of these sessions and try to like instigate the guards, the guys from cops, to get even more aggressive with me. So maybe the atmosphere would build and maybe something would be triggered that way. Mm-hmm. During one of the sessions, we actually heard a moan that we couldn't distinguish where it came from or what it was. So that's one piece of evidence we think is pretty solid during the lockdowns when they were yelling at us in the sessions.
Okay. But what did it feel like in the cell? Did it feel scary, or did it feel just like... Yeah. Did it feel like there was people around you wanting... you weren't alone, shall we say?
Yeah, I would say that. You definitely felt like you weren't the only one in the cell. I mean, the cells back in the day, most of them, at least the lower levels, I think the upper levels too, had 6 men per cell. They had 6 hammocks that went across each other.
Yeah.
So it was very crowded. So, I mean, claustrophobic, and myself, I'm claustrophobic like you are. Yeah. Just being in that small cell made me a little nervous. And then them yelling, it being dark, it definitely built up the atmosphere to have like an intimidation factor going on.
Okay. And Rich, what about you?
Yeah, I think even, like I said, knowing that you can get out, just being treated in that way by people who do that for a living and being within a cell, it does add a creep factor. So you always want to be careful of that as a paranormal investigator. If you're in somewhere that's psychologically frightening to begin with, like Fox Hollow Farm with all the murders, took place there, it does prey on your mind anyway. And so you're predisposed to a certain degree of bias. But we had something that made us all extremely wary. And as so often happens in paranormal research, it happened when we were just sitting around shooting the breeze. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I told you about this, but all of us was sitting on the floor of the main cell block, right. Just talking about nothing. I think Jason had just put on like an orange prison jumpsuit. We were sitting around in chairs, just having a cup of tea and hanging out. That's the one thing I did insist on being locked down with, is my kettle and teapot and stuff. And
I have to say, is the kettle I gave you still working?
The kettle you gave me?
Yeah, don't you remember?
Of course I remember, but I don't use that in the States.
Oh, does it? Oh, that's for when you come over here, is it?
I have one for wherever I go. I have one for England. I have one for going to work. I'm a collector of kettles now, just because I can survive anything with tea. But anyway, so we're all. But you
finished the box of tea I bought you, I presume.
Oh yeah. we're all sitting there, and all of a sudden we hear this bloody loud. It's a cross between like a growl and a roar. Would you say, Jason?
Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm.
And it was from the end of the cell block, and we actually wondered for a minute, like, did a mountain lion get in here? That's the closest thing I would think naturally would match up with what we heard.
Do you have mountain lions around there then?
They do.
They do, yes. Right? Okay.
Yeah, we went outside to check for that, actually, to make sure it wasn't something like that. I mean, we didn't go outside, but went as far as we could through the door to look around. We went out, looked out the windows and stuff to make sure that we didn't see any animals around, to just verify that it wasn't that when after we heard it.
And it was inside with us. I mean, I would stake my life on it. It was inside with us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Interesting.
Well, and it wasn't the first audible phenomenon. I mean, on the charity investigation I'd done a couple of years before, down in the cellar, the basement, where they store a whole bunch of stuff and supposedly has its own very specific spirits, two of my fellow investigators, a young chap called Colton Tapia, and I forget his colleague's name, they heard and recorded it was either a strangulation or a hacking up of a throat, or even the sound of a throat being cut. It sounded like kind of like that.
Okay.
And it was audible. So again, this isn't an EVP we're talking about in either case. This would be the equivalent of a direct voice phenomenon, right out of thin air.
Wow. Because there have been, I mean, one of the things you tend to find when you look into prisons is there's always accounts of people who've died whilst they were in custody there. And
there was only one count of a death there in the jail.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you there.
That's all right. That's why you've kind of stolen my thunder there, Jason. But there you go. I'll let you because you're my guest. But
Olga Knudsen, she went nuts at home. Her husband tried to remedy her for a day, and then the next day she was worse. Called the Red Cross. They took care of her for a while, and then she was getting worse. She wasn't eating, so they called the cops, the sheriff, I guess. He came and they booked her on insanity, and she was up in the upper level, and they figured out that she had postpartum psychosis, is what they called it.
Yeah.
And a few days later, she fell out. A doctor came in, gave her a quote unquote concoction of different drugs to try to calm her down and stuff, and she ended up dying right there in the cell.
Yeah, well, I mean, something I did find when I was looking up the history is they used to use Cripple Creek prison, or Cripple Creek jail, as somewhere to house psychiatric patients whilst they were waiting for a safe bed in a psychiatric unit, because they could be housed in a cell and they were in effect, they were safe because there would be nothing hopefully in that cell that they could do harm to themselves with. But Olga Knudsen, I did try to find her death certificate, because according to the report, she died on the 3rd of February 1907, and I tried really hard to find some kind of death certificate for her online. I couldn't find one.
I think Michelle's had trouble finding that too. I think she knows the story from like a newspaper clipping, is where I think she knows the story from the archives of the Teller County area. Yeah,
I did find a few newspapers that if I'd gone to the actual Colorado archives I could have looked at that flashed up, they had the headline. What I thought then I'd have a look, I'll see if I could find out, because Knudsen, her surname was Norwegian, I believe. And I did find an Olga Knudsen who arrived from Norway in New York on the 10th of July 1906 into New York on immigration. And I was wondering if that could be her, because one of the things I try and do when I find a death is look up some kind of confirmation of who the person was. And say I couldn't find any kind of death certificates, but what I did find when I was looking up into the archives for Colorado, which might explain why I had trouble, and I think it was Michelle, did you say, who's the sort of curator, had trouble as well, is apparently a lot of deaths in that part of Colorado weren't officially registered until 1908.
Oh, did not know that.
Yeah, and I found that in one of the historical Colorado sort of archaeological, not a haunted site, but a historical site for Colorado. It basically said, I'm paraphrasing, you may have trouble finding confirmation of deaths before 1908 because it wasn't an official requirement until after 1908.
What Michelle told us also was that she believes that she was Russian. But you're saying Norwegian. Right?
A surname, she might have originated in Russia, but a surname that I looked up and I can't think what they call it, how a name comes about, but the spelling of her name, Knudsen, if it was Knuden or Knuts, there was a different spelling of it, would have more intimated Swedish. Olga, yes, Olga is definitely a Russian name, but her surname, it originates in Norway. So, who knows?
So perhaps a spouse that was Norwegian, or a parent of each nationality.
Could have been. But Olga is more of a Russian name. But Knudsen, I can't think what they call it when you look back at heritage of a name, where it comes from. It's a Norwegian name.
Sorry, Richard, go.
Did you happen to look into the case of James Bacon while you were doing your research?
I only found out about that one literally just before I thought, after 5 hours of researching, that was enough. You have to stop at some point, when you start going down these research rabbit holes. And I spent a lot of effort trying to find Olga's details, like find some kind of confirmation of where she was buried. And I'm pretty sure if I made the trip to Colorado and went to your equivalent of our records office in Colorado, I could find some more information, because I'm getting quite good at finding stuff. But online, unfortunately, that was about as good as I could find that possibly possibly her arrival in New York, like 8 months before she passed away. Which she, you know, if it was due to postnatal depression or postpartum depression, whatever you call it in the country that you're in, she could very well have been pregnant, and that's why they made the trip.
Possibly.
Who knows?
True.
And I did find out that Colorado was actually one of the least populated for Norwegians in that period, because most of them were going to, I think it said the North Midwest was where most of them ended up going in the late 1800s, early 1900s. But but no, I didn't find out about James Bacon, but I read a bit about him. Is he the chap who was in prison because they accused him of killing his wife and child?
He was, and if the story went that supposedly they had an explosion in their kitchen, which killed his wife and child. He was blamed for it. He maintained till his dying day that he was innocent, and he was in fact wounded and hospitalized after this explosion. But he started to get death threats, and these death threats were, the usual kind of "you better get out of town or else," and they would be accompanied by a black hand mark, which I thought was very Sherlock Holmes.
Very Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, so he spent some time in the jail and then went on a hunger strike, starvation diet. So he would get weaker and weaker and weaker. And there are two kind of versions of what's supposed to have happened to him. One is that he was given a knife to trim his nails by a guard and used it to harm himself. And he claimed that masked men had broken in and assaulted him. But either way, they sliced him up bad enough that he was eviscerated. His bowels were out of his body. And so he would subsequently go on to die, not in the jail, but would die in hospital. So I always kind of wonder if there was some connection with his death and the trauma that had happened there and the haunting of the jail.
Wow. I'm going to have to look up more about him now. Thanks for that. God.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, I haven't got enough research projects on at the moment, but I'll have to look up that one as well. The other one I found that was quite interesting was the fact that you had one of Butch Cassidy's crew in prison there for a short while.
Yeah, you're looking at very cool old Wild Western history with this place. So appealing. And you know the old saying, if these walls could talk. The graffiti was, I've got photographs of it, I should send you a bunch of it.
Thank you.
The graffiti was just incredible, some of the stuff that was in there. Welcome to Hell was one thing that I saw. On the top of the men's cell block, somebody had scratched 132 laps equals 1 mile. So somebody had paced out while getting their exercise how many times you have to go around to walk a mile. The most depressing mile you can imagine, I saw a few swastikas, and you would see things like Jerry's Place for 70 days, Ron's house, that kind of thing.
There was modern stuff on some of the walls, too. I mean, like Def Leppard was written on one of the wall, I think, and some other musical acts were, scribbled on the wall, too. Like, it was from the 80s before the jail closed in 92.
Yeah.
So they were still doing that stuff all the way up until it closed, basically.
Well, I can't criticise them too much for their musical taste. At least it wasn't, I don't know, I try and think of some American bands that would...
Nickelback. Well, that's Canadian, I guess. Yeah.
Nickelback's still better than some, trust me. Who else have we got? New Kids on the Block, Backstreet Boys, NSYNC. Although NSYNC aren't too bad.
Yeah. New Kids on the Cell Block, surely.
I lined that one up for you, Richard. I was waiting for you to take that.
Knock them up, set them up, I'll knock them down.
You know it. But yeah, so Robert E. Curry was one of them. Although he wasn't one of the prolific members of the gang. He was actually his cousin, Harvey Logan, who was known as Kid Curry, who was actually meant to have been the worst member and had the most kills, because from what I read about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, still one of my favourite films, I hasten to add, but Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is they actually tried to do crimes without killing people. They didn't want to murder loads of people as outlaws. They were more interested in and one of the stories, I think it was Butch Cassidy, he was about to hold up a bank. I might have got this slightly wrong, but because I read it today, and he turned around to the bank manager and says, oh, by the way, did you know there's going to be a heist to rob your bank? And the bank manager says, how do you know? And he holds his gun up to him. He said, because I'm doing it. I thought you could have, that would have been a perfect line for a film, because I thought they must have had sort of some intelligence coming up with comments like that. But yeah, so Robert E. Curry, he was in prison there, although he wasn't one of the most prolific members. But he then formed, I think he was in the Curry gang with his cousin, as well after the Wild Bunch. But the thing I wanted to ask you boys about is, why does everything I read about Cripple Creek talk about the Cripple Creek donkeys?
You take this one, Jason.
Well, they have I think it's a dozen or so donkeys that they live in town, and they let them free during most of the spring, and then in the fall again, and they just wander about town and go back to where they are housed at the end of the night. I mean, sometimes we'll even see them in the middle of the night just walking around town, and
but
it's
why?
just one of those.
Why?
One of those, oh well, Richard, I don't even think I even knew. You know why?
It's just tradition. And that was actually one of the things I considered for the source of that strange noise. You know, did one of the town donkeys wander by? And
bray or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, I mean, I wonder if it's because Cripple Creek got its name with that whole donkey, you know, to begin with. And they seem to be the adopted animal of the town. It's a beautiful little town, too.
I wondered if perhaps they'd been used on the mines to pull things out, and they just let them... They kind of became almost part of...
The lore, yeah.
Yeah. Like pit ponies in the UK.
And they're very tolerated and welcome there.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, you can walk up to impediment and they won't mess with you. They'll just walk on. If they feel annoyed by it, you can go up and pet them and take pictures with them. They're very friendly and docile.
Donkeys normally are. They're not like horses in that respect. Yeah. No, they
as long
are.
As you
they
don't
are.
Make it yourself.
As long as you what?
As long as you don't make an ass of yourself, they'll usually be fairly friendly.
Dear, they're getting worse, Richard.
Dad jokes, and I'm not even a dad.
Anyway, that's been an hour, boys.
Wow.
It's been an hour. Doesn't it fly by?
It does.
Yeah.
And I covered everything I wanted to cover as well. Isn't that amazing? So would you recommend Cripple Creek if anyone's going into America, to Colorado, so what would we call it, sort of western side, central west, or whatever you said you call it? Would you recommend it as being a cracking place to go and learn stuff about the Wild West?
Definitely. There's a lot of history there. Not just with the prison or the jail, but there's a ton of history there to learn.
Richard?
And it's a friendly place as well. There are a lot of casinos there, which isn't my cup of tea. But you've got, like Jason said, so much to do, so much history that you can see. I would definitely recommend a visit to the Outlaws and Lawmen's Museum, which is what the jail is officially called. Mm-hmm. You can take tours there during the daytime. You can walk around, see the place for yourself. You can visit the gold mine just outside town. There is a lot to see and do in that area, a lot that relates to Colorado's history and heritage.
Nearly every weekend they have another festival going on. You know, there's an ice festival, there's car shows, there's almost always something going on every weekend in town, especially during spring and summer. But even during the winter months too, there's stuff going on almost every weekend in town. Awesome.
Well, I'll let you go now, boys. Thank you ever so much for being my guests this week on Haunted Histories, talking about Cripple Creek Jail. How was your inauguration into Haunted Histories then, Jason? Was it pain-free?
It was pain-free. I had a good time. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Good. Well, I'm sure love to have you back again if we can find somewhere else to talk about. And Richard, always a pleasure, never a chore.
It is, Penny. It's always fun. I'm sorry I don't have more time to chat with you tonight, but
that's all right,
hopefully we can catch up when we do another show.
We will catch up at some other time because I'm sure I've got stuff to tell you off air. Anyway, so that's been Haunted Histories. Thank you ever so much to my guests, Jason Fellon and Richard Estep from Colorado. You'll be hearing more from them, I'm sure, because you know what I'm like. When I find someone who's good to talk to on the show, I don't let them go. Anyway, next week I will be talking to Sam Bennett, and we'll be talking about Grendon Hall, and I'm going to get to talk about things like the Resistance and Special Operations Executive from World War II. I am going to be in my element. But until then, my friends, don't forget, if you miss one of the Parasearch shows, it's on 5 nights of the week. You can catch up with us on Spreaker and YouTube. And really, that's about it. So, have a good evening, sleep tight, and don't worry too much about things that go bump in the night.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.